You know, I've spent decades observing human nature, watching the endless dance of connection and withdrawal that defines our existence. And in all these years, one truth has emerged with startling clarity. The very thing we believe will bring us love, acceptance, and belonging is precisely what destroys it. We have been taught, haven't we, that to be good, to be worthy of affection, we must always be available, always ready with an answer when someone calls, always willing to drop our own pursuits the moment another person expresses need, always prepared to give of ourselves until there is nothing left to give. But I want to share something with you that may disturb the comfortable assumptions you carry about love and relationship. What if this constant availability, this perpetual readiness to serve others' needs, is not love at all? What if it is something far more dangerous, something that slowly erodes both your essence and the very connections you are trying to preserve? I remember sitting in my study many years ago, watching through my window as a neighbor rushed frantically from one obligation to another. Every day, the same pattern. Phone calls answered immediately, favors granted without hesitation, presents offered to anyone, a person believed deeply in who demanded it. This, their own goodness, their own generosity of honor. They wore their availability like a badge. Yet something struck me as profoundly tragic about this scene. For all their giving, all their constant presence, they seemed increasingly hollow, increasingly distant from their own center. And more curious still, those around them appeared to take this availability for granted, to value it less and less with each passing day. This is when I began to understand something fundamental about human psychology. We do not treasure what is always within reach. We do not respect what comes too easily. We do not value what costs nothing to obtain. Think about this for a moment. When someone is perpetually available to you, when they drop everything at your slightest request, when they have no boundaries around their time or energy, how do you truly feel about them? Be honest now. Do you hold them in higher regard? Or do you, perhaps unconsciously, begin to take them for granted? The human psyche operates according to principles that our conscious minds often refuse to acknowledge. We are drawn to mystery, to challenge, to what we cannot easily possess. This is not cruelty or shallowness. This is simply how we are made. When you make yourself constantly available, you eliminate mystery. You remove all sense of effort or achievement from the act of connecting with you. You become like air, essential perhaps, but utterly taken for granted until it is gone. But the destruction goes deeper than mere lack of appreciation. When you live in a state of constant availability, you begin to lose touch with yourself. Your own needs become foreign to you. Your own desires grow quiet and distant. You start to exist primarily in reaction to others, like a mirror that has forgotten it has its own surface beneath the reflections it carries. I have observed this pattern countless times in my work with patients. The woman who could not say no to her family's endless demands, only to discover she no longer remembered what brought her joy. The man who made himself indispensable to everyone around him, only to realize that no one truly knew who he was beneath his usefulness. The parent who gave everything to their children, only to find that their children respected them less, not more, for this sacrifice. This is the cruel paradox of excessive availability. In trying to ensure that others will love and need us, we make ourselves unlovable and unnecessary. We become the emotional equivalent of fast food, convenient and forgettable, rather than the rare delicacy that is savored and remembered. Now, I do not speak of this to encourage selfishness or cold indifference. That would be to swing to the opposite extreme, and extremes are rarely the answer to human dilemmas. I speak of this because I have seen what happens when people reclaim their scarcity, when they remember that their presence, their energy, their attention are valuable resources that should not be squandered. There is something magnificent that occurs when you begin to withdraw your constant availability. It is as if you remember that you are not merely a supporting character in everyone else's drama, but the protagonist of your own story. You begin to inhabit yourself again, to feel the weight and substance of your own existence. And here is what may surprise you. When you become less available, when you create space around yourself, when you honor your own rhythms and needs, you do not become less loving. You become more so. Because love that flows from a full vessel is infinitely more nourishing than love that flows from an empty one. I think of the difference between a rushing river and a deep well. The river seems more generous, always flowing, always giving. But it is the well that provides the sweetest water precisely because it holds something back, because it maintains its depth and mystery. When you stop being constantly available, you force others to value your presence. You create anticipation for your attention. You make the moments of your giving more precious, because they are not guaranteed. This is not manipulation. This is simply recognizing the truth about human nature and working with it rather than against it. But there is an even deeper transformation that occurs, one that touches the very core of your being. When you withdraw from the exhausting dance of constant availability, you create space for something that modern life has nearly destroyed: solitude. Real solitude. Not the restless kind where you are physically alone but mentally scattered, but the profound solitude where you can hear your own voice again. In this space, something remarkable happens. You begin to remember who you are when you are not performing for others, when you are not anticipating their needs, when you are not measuring yourself against their expectations. You rediscover the person you were before the world convinced you that your worth depended on your usefulness to others. This is where true strength is born, not in the ability to serve others endlessly, but in the capacity to serve yourself first, to fill your own cup before attempting to fill others. And paradoxically, it is from this place of self-possession that your most authentic gifts to the world emerge. Think of the people who have most influenced your life, who have left the deepest mark on your consciousness. Were they the ones who were always available, always accommodating, always saying yes? Or were they the ones who had a certain presence about them, a weight, a depth that came from knowing themselves and honoring their own boundaries? The truly magnetic individuals in this world are not those who give themselves away freely. They are those who have something to give because they have first given to themselves. They understand that their energy, their time, their presence are not unlimited resources to be squandered, but precious gifts to be shared thoughtfully. When you stop being available to everyone, you become available to yourself. And when you become available to yourself, you discover something that constant busyness and endless giving had hidden from you. You discover that you are enough, not because of how what you do for others not useful you make yourself, but simply because you exist. This realization changes everything. It changes how you move through the world, how you relate to others, how you make decisions about where to invest your precious life energy. You begin to choose your connections more carefully, to honor your own rhythms, to say no without guilt and yes with genuine enthusiasm. And here is the beautiful mystery. As you become less available to everyone, you become more present to the people who truly matter. Your relationships deepen because they are no longer based on obligation or habit, but on genuine choice and mutual respect. The people who drain you most are not those who openly take from you. They are those who have trained you to believe that your constant giving is what makes you good, what makes you worthy, what makes you necessary to their existence. I have watched this pattern repeat itself in countless lives. The mother who cannot bear to see her adult children struggle, so she rushes in to solve every problem, only to discover that they have never learned to solve anything for themselves. The friend who answers every crisis call at 3 in the morning, who drops everything for every emergency, only to find that the Cree are their work, who volunteers for every additionalizes, multiply rather than diminish. The colleague who stays late to help others with tasks, only to realize that their own projects, their own dreams, have withered from neglect. These generous souls believe they are being loving, but what they are actually doing is something far more complex and far more destructive. They are teaching others to be helpless. They are enabling a kind of psychological dependency that serves no one. And most painfully of all, they are slowly disappearing into the needs of others until there is nothing left of themselves. You see, when you are always available, you rob others of something precious. You rob them of the opportunity to grow, to struggle, to develop their own strengths. When someone knows that you will always rescue them, they never learn to rescue themselves. When they know you will always be there to solve their problems, they never develop their own problem-solving abilities. When they understand that your time and energy are infinitely available, they never learn to value time and energy at all. But perhaps more troubling still, you rob yourself of something even more precious. You rob yourself of the respect that comes from having boundaries. You rob yourself of the deep satisfaction that comes from choosing how to spend your life rather than simply reacting to the demands of others. You rob yourself of the mysterious power that emerges when people must earn your attention rather than simply assume it. I remember a patient who came to me in a state of complete exhaustion. She was a woman of extraordinary kindness, always the first to volunteer, always ready to help, always available when anyone needed anything. Her family called her their rock. Her friends considered her indispensable. Her community relied on her for everything. And yet, she sat in my office feeling utterly empty, utterly forgotten, utterly alone. She could not understand how this had happened. After all, she was surrounded by people who needed her, but that was precisely the problem. She was needed, but she was not wanted. She was useful, but she was not loved. She was available, but she was not valued. Because when something is always available, it ceases to be special. When someone never says no, their yes loses all meaning. This woman had to learn one of the most difficult lessons the human soul can master. She had to learn to disappoint people. She had to discover that saying no is not cruelty but kindness, not selfishness but wisdom, not abandonment but love in its truest form. The transformation that followed was extraordinary. As she began to withdraw her constant availability, something remarkable happened. The people in her life began to change. Some, it is true, became angry. They accused her of becoming selfish, of no longer caring, of abandoning them in their time of need. These were the people who had been using her availability as a drug, who had become addicted to her endless giving, and like all addicts, when their supply is threatened, they lashed out. But others responded differently. They began to approach her with more respect. They began to value the time she did give them because it was no longer guaranteed. They began to solve their own problems because they could no longer rely on her to solve everything for them. And most surprisingly of all, they began to give back to her in ways they never had before. This is the paradox I have observed time and again in human relationships. When you make yourself scarce, you become precious. When you withdraw your constant availability, people begin to appreciate your presence. When you stop giving yourself away for free, others start to invest in earning your attention. But the deepest transformation happens within yourself, in those else's need, not moments when you are not rushing to meet someone, answering every call, not solving every problem. You encounter something you may have forgotten existed: yourself, your own thoughts, your own desires, your own rhythm of being. Modern life conspires against this encounter with ourselves. We are taught to stay busy, to stay connected, to stay available. We carry devices that ensure we can be reached at any moment. We pride ourselves on our responsiveness, our helpfulness, our inability to say no. But in doing so, we create a life of constant reaction rather than conscious action. We become like leaves blown by the wind of other people's needs rather than trees rooted in our own purpose. When you begin to withdraw your availability, you discover something profound about the nature of relationship itself. True connection cannot happen when one person is always giving and the other is always taking. Real intimacy requires two whole people, not one person trying to fill the emptiness in another. Authentic love flows between equals, not from the exhausted to the demanding. I think of love as I think of fire. A fire needs space around it to burn properly. If you pile too much wood on too quickly, you smother the flame. If you constantly tend it, never allowing it to find its own rhythm, you interfere with its natural process. But if you give it the right amount of fuel at the right time, if you allow it space to breathe, it will burn bright and warm for years. Your availability is like that wood. Given thoughtfully and sparingly, it feeds the fire of relationship. Given constantly and without discrimination, it smothers the very connections you are trying to nurture. There is something sacred about withdrawal, about creating space, about allowing others to experience your absence. In that can grow space, longing, appreciation can develop. The other person can discover what your presence actually means to them. They can feel, and in that feeling, respect the difference between having you and not having you is born. But you must be prepared for what happens when you begin this withdrawal. Not everyone will understand. Not everyone will approve. Some will try to guilt you back into your old patterns of constant availability. They will remind you of how you used to be, of how much they depend on you, of how selfish you are becoming. This is the test. This is where you discover whether you have the courage to honor your own boundaries even when others are displeased. This is where you learn that disappointing others is sometimes the most loving thing you can do, both for them and for yourself. The people who truly care about you will adapt. They will learn to value your time because it is limited. They will appreciate your help because it is chosen rather than automatic. They will respect your boundaries because you respect them yourself. And those who cannot adapt, those who rage against your newfound scarcity, those who demand that you return to your old patterns of endless availability, they reveal something important about the nature of your relationship with them. They were not loving you. They were using you. And the moment you stopped allowing yourself to be used, they showed their true nature. This realization can be painful, but it is also liberating. Because once you see clearly who is in your life for love and who is there for convenience, you can begin to invest your precious energy where it will be truly appreciated and reciprocated. The art of becoming unavailable is not about building walls or becoming cold. It is about becoming selective. It is about recognizing that your time, your energy, your presence are finite resources that deserve to be invested wisely. It is about understanding that the word no is not a rejection of others, but an affirmation of yourself. When you master this art, something beautiful happens. Your yes becomes powerful because it is rare. Your presence becomes magnetic because it cannot be taken for granted. Your love becomes transformative because it flows from fullness rather than emptiness. And in that transformation, you discover what you were always meant to be, not a servant to everyone else's needs, but the author of your own life, not a reaction to other people's demands, but a conscious creator of meaningful, available to connections. Not always everyone, but deeply present to those who truly matter. This is the path back gets everything better, not to yourself. This is how, by giving more, but by choosing carefully where you give. Not by being more available, but by making your availability something that must be earned. Not by saying yes to everything, but by making your yes mean something again. You see, there is something most curious that happens when you begin to practice. At first, it feels almost this withdrawal unbearable. The guilt rises in you like a tide. Every unanswered call becomes a weight on your conscience. Every declined invitation feels like a betrayal. This is because you have spent so long defining yourself through your usefulness to others, that without it, you hardly know who you are. I have sat with this discomfort myself in those quiet hours when the world expected me to be available and I chose instead to be present with my own thoughts. There is a particular quality to this solitude that most people never experience because they are too afraid of what they might find there. But what you discover in that space is not the selfishness you feared. What you discover is your authentic self, the one that existed before the world taught you that love must be earned through endless service. This self has its own rhythms, its own needs, its own wisdom. It knows when to give and when to withhold. It understands that true generosity comes not from depletion but from abundance. It recognizes that the most profound gift you can offer another human being is not your availability but your presence. And presence, real presence, can only emerge from someone who is present with themselves first. I remember watching a tree, a particularly difficult one, during my own period of withdrawal from the world's demands. It was winter, and the tree stood bare against the gray sky, offering nothing to anyone. No shade, no fruit, no flowers. And yet there was something magnificent about its refusal to apologize for its season of rest. It understood what we have forgotten, that there are times for giving and times for gathering strength, times for offering and times for receiving, times for availability and times for sacred withdrawal. The tree did not worry that the birds might find it selfish for offering no perch. It did not feel guilty for providing no shelter. It simply stood in its own truth, drawing nutrients from deep within itself, preparing for the abundance that would come when the season was right. And when spring arrived, oh, how generous it became. But that generosity was possible only because it had honored its time of apparent barrenness. This is what we must learn, that our seasons of withdrawal are not selfish but essential. They are not abandonment but preparation. They are not the end of our capacity to love, but the beginning of our ability to love authentically. When you first begin to say no, when you first start to protect your time and energy, you will encounter something that may surprise you. Resistance, not just from others, but from within yourself. There is a part of you that has become addicted to being needed, that derives its sense of worth from being indispensable. This part will panic when you begin to withdraw. It will whisper that you are becoming cold, uncaring, that people will abandon you if you are not constantly available to them. But this voice is not your wisdom speaking, it is your fear. And fear, I counselor, when always a poor have learned, is almost it comes to matters of the soul. The fear tells you that love is conditional, that it must be earned through service, that your worth depends on your utility to others. But love, real love, asks for nothing but your authentic presence. It does not require you to exhaust yourself in its service. I have observed something fascinating in my years of working with people. Those who are most constantly available are often the most emotionally distant. They give and give and give, but there is something hollow in their giving, something that leaves both giver and receiver unsatisfied. This is because when you give from emptiness, when you serve from obligation rather than choice, there is no soul in the offering. It becomes mere performance, a kind of emotional theater that satisfies no one. But when someone has taken time to fill their own cup, when they have honored their own needs and boundaries, when they give from abundance rather than depletion, the quality of their offering changes completely. There is presence in it, weight, authenticity. The recipient feels truly seen, truly served, because the giver is truly there. This is why the most powerful people in any room are often not the most talkative or the most accommodating. They are the ones who have learned to be selective with their energy, who speak they have to say, who give. When something meaningful they're giving can make a real difference, they understand gift, not a right that their presence is a others can claim. I think of the difference between a candle that burns steadily and one that flickers constantly in the wind. The flickering candle may seem more active, more responsive to every breeze, but it gives less light and burns out much faster. The steady candle, protected by its own stillness, illuminates far more and lasts far longer. This is the difference between reactive availability and conscious presence. When you stop being reactive, when you cease to respond to every demand on your attention, you create something rare in this world. You create space, and in that space something can grow that is impossible in the constant rush of response and reaction. Wisdom can emerge. Your depths can develop own authentic voice, can finally be heard above the chorus of other people's needs. But perhaps most importantly, you give others the gift of your genuine choice. When someone knows that your time is precious, that your attention must be earned, that your presence is not guaranteed, they approach you differently. They bring their best selves to the interaction because they know it matters. They prepare what they want to say because they know your listening is valuable. They appreciate what you give because they know it is given freely, not from obligation. This changes the entire dynamic of relationship. Instead of one person constantly giving while the other takes, you create the possibility of genuine exchange. Instead of relationships based on need and dependency, you foster connections built on mutual respect and authentic choice. Instead of being loved for what you do, you become loved for who you are. The transformation is not immediate. It requires patience with yourself and with others as everyone adjusts to this new way of being. Some people will test your boundaries, trying to pull you back into old patterns. Others will respect your new stance immediately. And some, sadly, will reveal that their connection to you was based entirely on what you could do for them rather than who you are as a person. This last realization can be deeply painful, but it is also profoundly liberating. Because once you see clearly which relationships are based on authentic connection and which are based on utility, you can invest your precious life energy where it will truly flourish. You can stop pouring water into broken Arish, the relationships, vessels, and instead N that have the capacity to grow and deepen. I have watched people go through this process of learning to withdraw their constant availability, and the pattern is always the same. First comes the guilt and fear, then comes the testing from others, then comes the clarity about which relationships are real and which are merely functional. And finally comes something beautiful, a sense of coming home to themselves, a feeling of integrity that they may not have experienced since childhood. This integrity is not hardness or coldness. It is the opposite. It is the warm strength that comes from knowing your own boundaries and honoring them. It is the quiet confidence that emerges when you stop seeking approval and start seeking authenticity. It is the deep peace that settles over a life that is lived from the inside out rather than from the outside in. When you reach this place, something miraculous happens to your capacity to love. It expands, not because you are giving more, but because you are giving from a deeper place. Your love becomes less desperate and more generous, less needy and more nourishing, less about what you can get and more about what you can genuinely offer. People sense this change immediately. They feel the difference between someone who is available out of fear and someone who is present out of choice. They recognize the authenticity in someone who has learned to honor their own needs alongside the needs of others. They are drawn to the quiet strength of someone who knows their own worth and does not need constant validation from others. This is how everything gets better when you stop being available. Not because you become less loving, but because you become more authentically loving. Not because you care less about others, but because you finally learn to care for yourself as well. Not because you withdraw from relationship, but because you enter into relationship as a whole person rather than a fragment of yourself. The journey back to yourself through conscious unavailability is not easy, but it is perhaps the most important journey you will ever take. Because at the end of it, you discover something that all the endless giving and constant availability could never provide. You discover that you are enough, not because of what you do for others, but because of who you are when you are alone with yourself in the quiet moments when no one needs anything from you. And from that place of enoughness, from that solid ground of self-acceptance and self-respect, you can offer the world something it desperately needs. Not another person who gives from emptiness and exhaustion, but someone. Not another available who gives from fullness and choice body rushing to meet every demand, but a conscious soul choosing carefully where to invest the precious gift of their presence. This is the secret that changes everything. When you stop being available to everyone, you become truly available to yourself, infinitely more valuable to offer the world then. And when you are truly available to yourself, you discover that you have something in your constant service. You have your authentic presence, and that, my friend, is a gift beyond measure. In those moments of newfound solitude, when you have finally stepped back from the endless carousel of other people's demands, you encounter something that may disturb you more than all the guilt and resistance combined. You encounter the vastness of your own unexplored inner landscape. Most people you see have spent so many years defining themselves through their relationships to others that they have forgotten they have an inner world at all. They know themselves only as mother, friend, employee, helper, supporter. But who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when no one needs anything from you? Who are you in the silence between the demands? I spent many evenings in my study after I had learned to close my door to the world's constant calling question. And I discovered something that, sitting with this, very shocked me. I discovered that I had opinions I had never expressed, desires I had never acknowledged, dreams I had abandoned so long ago I had forgotten they were mine. There is a particular quality to this rediscovery that is both exhilarating and terrifying. It is like walking into a room in your own house that you never knew existed. Everything there belongs to you, but it feels foreign, almost forbidden. These are the parts of yourself that you sacrificed on the altar of availability, the aspects of your being that you buried beneath the endless yes. But here is what I want you to understand about this process of withdrawal. It is not punishment. It is not selfishness. It is archaeology. You are digging through layers of accumulated obligation and expectation to find the artifacts of your authentic self. Each no you speak, each boundary you establish, each moment you choose solitude over service is a careful excavation of who you really are, beneath who you think you should be. I remember the first time I realized that I had preferences the world had never seen. Simple things, really. I preferred morning silence to morning conversation. I found more nourishment in one meaningful exchange than in a dozen pleasant interactions. I discovered that my mind worked differently when it was not constantly interrupted by the needs of others. These revelations felt revolutionary because they had been buried so long beneath my availability to everyone else. This is what happens when you stop being constantly present for others. You become present for yourself in ways that may surprise you. You notice the rhythm of your own thoughts. You become aware of your own emotional weather patterns. You start to recognize the difference between what you actually feel and what you think you should feel. And in this recognition, something profound begins to shift in how you relate to the world. You stop approaching relationships from a place of desperate need to a place of genuine curiosity about connection be needed. Instead, you begin to approach them from the difference is extraordinary. When you need to be needed, every interaction becomes a performance. You are constantly scanning for ways to make yourself useful, indispensable, necessary. You listen not to understand, but to find problems you can solve, burdens you can carry, ways you can prove your worth through service. This creates relationships that are fundamentally unequal, where one person is always the giver and the other is always the receiver. But when you approach relationship from your own fullness, from your own centered presence, something entirely different becomes possible. You can listen without needing to fix. You can be present without needing to perform. You can offer support without losing yourself in the process. I have observed this transformation in myself and in countless others who have learned to withdraw their constant availability. There is a quality of presence that emerges that is unlike anything they had experienced before. It is presence without agenda, attention without desperation, love without the need to be loved in return. This shift changes not only how you relate to others, but how others relate to you. People begin to sense that you are not trying to get something from them. You are not seeking their approval, their gratitude, their dependency. You are simply there, fully and authentically there, offering what you can offer without attachment to their response. And paradoxically, this is when people begin to trust you more deeply than they ever did when you were constantly available. Because they sense that your presence is genuine, not performative. They feel that you are with them not because you need to be, but because you choose to be. And choice, real choice, is the foundation of all authentic relationship. But there is something else that happens in this process of withdrawal that touches on the very nature of human consciousness itself. When you stop filling every moment with response to external demands, when you create space in your life for genuine solitude, you begin to access parts of your psyche that have been dormant for years. In the constant rush of availability, the deeper layers of consciousness never have a chance to surface. the insights that arise only in stillness, the wisdom that emerges only in silence, the creative impulses that require space to breathe, all of these remain buried beneath the urgency of other people's needs. I spent years in analysis, both as patient and as practitioner, exploring these deeper layers of the human psyche. And what I discovered is that our most profound gifts to the world do not come from our availability to respond to every request. They come from our willingness to dive deep into our own being and bring up what we find there. The great artists, the profound teachers, the healers who truly heal, they all understand this principle. They know that their most valuable contributions come not from saying yes to every opportunity, but from saying no to almost everything, so they can say yes to what truly matters. They understand that creativity requires solitude, that wisdom requires reflection, that authentic service requires first serving the deepest parts of themselves. When you withdraw your constant availability, you create space for these deeper gifts to emerge. You begin to access the parts of yourself that have been waiting patiently beneath the surface for their moment to contribute. And what you discover is that these gifts are infinitely more valuable than your endless accommodation ever was. I think of consciousness like a well. When you are constantly drawing from it to meet everyone else's needs, the water becomes murky, depleted, shallow. But when you allow it time to rest, to settle, to fill from its deeper sources, the water that emerges is clear, pure, life-giving. This is why the most profound teachers throughout history have all understood the necessity of withdrawal. Buddha under his tree, Jesus in the wilderness, the mystics in their caves, they were not escaping the world. They were diving deep enough into themselves to have something real to offer the world. And here is what may surprise you about this process. As you withdraw from constant availability, as you create space for your own depth to emerge, you do not become less compassionate. You become more compassionate. But it is a different kind of compassion altogether. Instead of the frantic compassion that rushes to fix every problem and solve every pain, you develop what I call witnessing compassion. This is the capacity to be fully present with suffering without needing to eliminate it immediately, to sit with someone in their struggle without needing to rescue them from it, to offer your presence as a gift rather than your solutions as a demand. This kind of compassion is infinitely more healing than the rushing, fixing, problem-solving approach that comes from constant availability, because it allows the other person to remain whole, to maintain their own power, to find their own solutions. It honors their capacity to grow through difficulty rather than protecting them from all challenge. I have sat with people in the deepest despair, and I have learned that what they need most is not my answers, but my presence, not my solutions, but my willingness to be with them in their darkness without needing to turn on all the lights immediately. This kind of presence can only come from someone who has learned to be present with their own darkness, their own struggles, their own unanswered questions. When you stop being constantly available to fix everyone else's problems, you develop the capacity to be genuinely available to witness their experience. And witnessing, true witnessing, is perhaps the most healing gift one human being can offer another. But this transformation goes even deeper than how you relate to individuals. It changes how you relate to the collective, to society, to the great movements and causes that demand your attention and energy. When you are constantly available, you become reactive to every crisis, every emergency, every urgent call for action. You live in a state of perpetual crisis response, never able to step back and see the larger patterns at work. But when you withdraw from this reactive availability, when you create space for reflection and deeper consideration, you begin to see things differently. You start to recognize which crises are genuine and which are manufactured. You develop the discernment to know when your energy will make a real difference and when it will simply be consumed by the endless machinery of urgency. This does not make you apathetic or uncaring. It makes you strategic. It makes you effective. It allows you to contribute from a place of wisdom rather than merely from a place of reaction. You begin to understand that the world does not need more people saying yes to everything. It needs more people who can say no to almost everything, so they can say yes powerfully to what truly matters. I have watched the great movements of my time, the causes that have shaped our world, and I have noticed something fascinating. The people who make the most lasting difference are rarely the ones who are available for every meeting, every protest, every urgent call to action. They are the ones who disappear for months or years at a time, diving deep into their own understanding, developing their own vision, and then emerging with something genuinely transformative to offer. This is because real change, lasting change, does not come from reaction. It comes from vision. And vision requires the kind of deep seeing that is only possible when you step back from the immediate demands of the moment and allow yourself to perceive the larger patterns at work. When you learn to withdraw your constant availability, you develop this capacity for deeper seeing. You begin to understand not just what is happening on the surface, but why it is happening at the deeper levels. You start to recognize the unconscious forces at work in yourself and in others. And from this understanding, you can offer something far more valuable than your immediate availability. You can offer genuine insight. The world is full of people who will tell you what to do. It is hungry for people who can help you understand why you do what you do. Full of those who will solve your problems for you. Desperate for those who can help you develop the capacity to solve your own problems. Rich with those who will be available whenever you call. Starving for those who can teach you to be available to yourself. This is the gift you develop when you learn the art of conscious unavailability. You become someone who can offer not just service, but wisdom. Not just help, but understanding. Not just solutions, but the capacity to find solutions. And these gifts are infinitely more valuable than constant availability could ever be. But perhaps the most profound transformation that occurs when you withdraw from constant availability is in your relationship with time itself. When you are always responding to others, time feels like something that happens to you. You are constantly being pulled from one urgent matter to another, never feeling like you have enough time, never feeling like you are in control of your own schedule. But when you reclaim your availability, when you become selective about how you spend your precious life energy, something remarkable happens. Time stops being your enemy and becomes your ally. You begin to feel like you have enough time because you are no longer wasting it on things that do not truly matter to you. This shift in your relationship with time creates a ripple effect that touches every aspect of your life. You become more present in your interactions because you have chosen to be there rather than feeling obligated. You become more creative in your work because you have space to think and reflect. You become more loving and your love flows from choice people's needs. In this transformation, you discover something that realization of all you of obligations and duties, but an actual life with discover that you have relationships because you're alive, not just a series, not just a collection rather than duty. And maybe the most important of responses to other, its own rhythm, its own purpose, its own unique contribution to make to the world. This life has been waiting for you all along, patient and persistent, beneath all the noise of constant availability. It has been there in the quiet moments between the demands, in the spaces between the responses, in the silence between the words, but it could only emerge when you finally created enough space for it to breathe. When you discover this life, when you finally meet yourself in the fullness of who you are rather than just in the fragment of what you do for others, everything changes. Your relationships deepen because they are based on authentic connection rather than mutual dependency. Your work becomes meaningful because it flows from your own purpose rather than others' expectations. Your very presence in the world becomes a gift because it is genuinely yours to give. This is how everything gets better when you stop being available, not through some external change in circumstances, but through an internal recognition of who you actually are when you are not performing for others, through a remembering of the life that has been waiting for you to claim it, through a coming home to yourself that makes every other relationship more authentic, every other activity more meaningful, every moment more fully lived. The journey from constant availability to conscious presence is not easy, but it is perhaps the most important journey any human being can take. Because at the end of it, you discover not just how to live better, but how to live at all. How to inhabit your own existence rather than simply reacting to everyone else's. How to offer the world not just your services, but your authentic self. And that self, my friend, that authentic, fully present, consciously choosing self, is the greatest gift you could ever give to a world that desperately needs not more people who are available for everything, but more people who are genuinely present for what truly matters. In the deepest hours of my contemplator finally quiets, and I am left alone with theation, when the world's constant vast territories of the human soul, I find myself returning again and again to a question that has haunted me for decades. Why do we fear our own solitude more than we fear losing ourselves in the crowd? I watch people today, and I see something that breaks my heart. They carry these devices, these little windows to everywhere else, and the moment they find themselves alone, the moment silence threatens to descend, they immediately reach for these connections to anywhere but here, to anyone but themselves. They have become so afraid of their own company that they would rather live in the shallow waters of constant interaction than dive into the deep pools of their own being. But what they do not understand, what our entire culture seems to have forgotten, is that this fear of solitude is actually a fear of the most beautiful encounter they will ever have. It is the fear of meeting themselves as they truly are, beneath all the masks, beneath all the performance, beneath all the desperate scrambling to be useful to others. I remember the first time I truly allowed myself to be unavailable, to step away from the endless demands and expectations that had shaped my days. It was terrifying. The silence felt like a judgment. The emptiness felt like abandonment. Every part of me wanted to rush back into the familiar chaos of being needed, being useful, being anything other than simply being. But I stayed with that discomfort, and gradually something extraordinary began to emerge from the silence. I began to hear a voice I had not heard in years, my own voice. Not the voice that knew what others wanted to hear, not the voice that rushed to solve problems or offer comfort, but the voice that carried my own truth, my own questions, my own unfinished business with existence itself. This voice had been buried under decades of availability, smothered by the constant need to respond, to help, to be present for everyone except the one person who most needed my presence, myself. And as I learned to listen to this voice, I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about love, about service, about what it means to be truly helpful to another human being. You see, when you are constantly available, when you rush to meet every need and solve every problem, you are not actually helping anyone. You are participating in a kind of collective avoidance of the one thing that could truly heal us all, the willingness to sit with our own darkness, our own uncertainty, our own unfinished becoming. Every time you rescue someone from their struggle, you rob them of the possibility of discovering their own strength. Every time you rush in with answers, you prevent them from developing their own capacity to question. Every time you make yourself available to soothe their discomfort, you teach them that discomfort is something to be avoided rather than something to be explored. But more than this, you rob yourself of something even more precious. You rob yourself of the profound encounter with your own depths that can only happen in solitude, in the spaces between obligations, in the silence that follows when you finally stop performing your helpfulness for the world. I spent many years believing that my worth was measured by my usefulness to others. I thought that love was something I had to earn through service, that connection required constant availability, that to withdraw was to abandon. But this belief was slowly killing something essential in me. It was strangling the very source from which authentic love and genuine service must flow. The truth I discovered in my withdrawal, the truth that changed everything, is this: you cannot give what you do not have. And if you have never taken the time to discover what you actually have to give, if you have never sat with yourself long enough to know your own depths, then everything you offer to others is borrowed, second-hand, empty of the substance that makes giving meaningful. When I finally learned to say no, when I finally created boundaries around my time and energy, when I finally chose solitude over constant availability, something miraculous happened. I did not become less loving. I became more loving. But it was a different kind of love altogether. It was love that flowed from fullness rather than emptiness, choice rather than obligation, presence rather than performance. And the people in my life, those who truly mattered, they felt the difference immediately. They sensed that when I was with them, I was fully with them, not because I had to be, but because I had chosen to be. They felt the weight of my attention because they knew it was not given freely to everyone who demanded it. They experienced my presence as a gift rather than an expectation. But there were others, and this was painful to discover, who became angry when I was no longer constantly available. They accused me of becoming cold, selfish, uncaring, and in their anger they revealed something I had been too blind to see before. They had never loved me. They had loved what I could do for them. They had loved my usefulness, my availability, my willingness to disappear into their needs. This realization was devastating and liberating in equal measure. Devastating because I saw how many of my relationships had been built on this false foundation. Liberating because I finally understood that real love, authentic connection, genuine intimacy could only exist between people who were whole enough to choose each other rather than need each other. In the solitude I had finally learned to embrace, I encountered parts of myself that had been dormant for years, creative impulses that had been buried under the urgency of other people's problems, insights that could only emerge in the stillness between responses, dreams that had been postponed indefinitely while I attended to everyone else's dreams. I discovered that I had opinions I had never voiced, preferences I had never honored, desires I had sacrificed on the altar of being universally available. And as I began to reclaim these lost parts of myself, as I began to honor my own rhythms and respect my own boundaries, something profound shifted in how I moved through the world. I stopped approaching relationships from a place of desperate need to be needed. Instead, I began to approach them from genuine curiosity about connection. I stopped listening only for problems I could solve and began listening for the deeper truths people were trying to express. I stopped performing my helpfulness and began offering my authentic presence. And presence, I learned, presence is so much more powerful than availability. Anyone people are available can be available most all the time. Scatter, add across dozen different demands, giving fragments of themselves to whoever asks loudest. But presence, real presence, the full weight of your attention and care concentrated in this moment with this person, this is rare beyond measure. When you learn to withdraw your constant availability, you develop the capacity for this kind of presence. You become someone who can sit with another person's pain without immediately trying to fix it. You can witness their struggle without needing to rescue them from it. You can offer the profound gift of being fully there without agenda, without the need to be useful, without the compulsion to solve or save or improve. This witnessing presence is what the world desperately needs. Not more people rushing to fix every problem, but more people who can be genuinely present with the mystery of human suffering and joy. Not more helpers, but more witnesses. Not more solutions, but more sacred space for truth to emerge in its own time. In my years of working with the human psyche, I have learned that healing rarely comes through external intervention. It comes through the gradual process of a person encountering themselves fully, accepting what they find there, and choosing to live from that authentic center rather than from the false self they constructed to please others. But this encounter with oneself can only happen in solitude. It requires space away from the constant input of others' needs and expectations. It demands time to sit with your own questions without rushing to find answers. It needs silence deep enough that you can hear the whispers of your own soul beneath the noise of the world's demands. When you finally create this space, when you finally learn to be unavailable to everyone else so you can be available to yourself, you discover something extraordinary. You discover that you are not empty. You are not nothing without your usefulness to others. You are not abandoned when you choose solitude over constant connection. Instead, you find that you are full of your own substance, rich with your own depth, complete in ways you never imagined possible. You realize that the person you have been looking for in all your relationships, the one who would finally see you and value you and love you completely, has been waiting for you in the silence all along. This person is yourself, not the performing self, not the helpful self, not the constantly available self, but the authentic self that exists before and beneath all the roles you play for others. And when you finally meet this self, when you finally learn to be present with your own presence, everything changes. Your relationships become choices rather than obligations. Your work becomes an expression of your authentic gifts rather than a series of responses to external demands. Your very existence becomes a conscious creation rather than a reaction to the expectations of others. This is the great secret hidden in the art of becoming unavailable. It is not really about withdrawing from others. It is about withdrawing into yourself deeply enough that when you do emerge, when you do choose to be present with another human being, you have something real to offer. Not your emptiness seeking to be filled, not your need seeking to be met, but your fullness seeking to be shared. And this fullness, this authentic presence that emerges from genuine solitude, this is what transforms everything. It changes how people experience you, how they relate to you, how they value the time you choose to spend with them. It changes how you experience yourself, how you make decisions, how you move through the world with quiet confidence rather than desperate neediness. Most importantly, it changes what you have to give to the world. Instead of offering your depletion disguised as service, you can offer your genuine gifts. Instead of giving from the surface of yourself, you can give from the depths. Instead of being available to everyone for everything, you can be deeply present to the right people at the right times for the right reasons. This is how everything gets better when you stop being available, not because you love less, but because you learn to love from wholeness rather than brokenness. Not because you serve less, but because you serve from choice rather than compulsion. Not because you connect less, but because you connect authentically rather than desperately. The journey into conscious unavailability is the journey back to yourself, and that self, my friend, that authentic, whole, consciously choosing self, is the greatest gift you could ever give to a world that is drowning in empty availability and starving for genuine presence. When you finally understand this, when you finally have the courage to disappear from the world's constant demands long enough to discover who you are in the silence, you will emerge as someone entirely different. Someone who knows their own worth, honors their own boundaries, and offers their presence as the rare and precious gift it truly is. And in that transformation, you will discover what I discovered in my own journey from constant availability to conscious presence. That the most loving thing you can do for the world is to become fully yourself. That the most generous gift you can offer is your authentic being. That the most healing presence you can provide is the presence of someone who has learned to be present with themselves first. This is the path that leads not just to better relationships, but to a better life. Not just to being more helpful, but to being more human. Not just to serving others more effectively, but to serving the deepest truth of who you are meant to be in this world. And that truth, that authentic self that emerges from the courage to be unavailable to everyone else so you can be available to yourself, that is the secret that changes everything. That is the gift the world has been waiting for you to unwrap. That is the love that can only be given by someone who has first learned to love themselves enough to protect the sacred space where that love is born. Innerst chambers the deep of my understanding, after decades spent mapping the territories of the human soul, I have come to see that what we call wisdom is often nothing more than the courage to live with our own contradictions. And nowhere is this more evident than in what happens when we finally learn to honor the sacred word that our culture has taught us to fear above all others. No. You see, there is something profoundly disturbing about a person who cannot say no. They walk through life like ghosts of themselves, present in body but absent in spirit, giving and giving until and then somehow there is nothing left to give, finding more to give anyway. They believe they are being virtuous, but what they are actually doing is participating in a kind of spiritual suicide, a slow dissolution of the self in service to an ideal that serves no one, least of all themselves. I have sat with such people in the quiet of my consulting room, watching them struggle to understand why they feel so empty despite their endless generosity, why they feel so alone, despite being constantly surrounded by those who need them. And what I have learned is that their very availability has become their prison, a chain that binds them not to love, but to a hollow performance of love that satisfies neither giver nor receiver. There is a particular quality to the exhaustion of someone who has never learned to withdraw. It is not the clean tiredness that comes from meaningful work or genuine engagement. It is the gray fatigue of someone who has been living outside themselves for so long they have forgotten there is an inside to return to. They move through their days like actors who have lost the script but continue performing anyway, hoping someone will tell them when the play is over. But the play never ends when you cannot say no. There is always another scene, another costume to put on, another role to perform. The helpful friend, the devoted parent, the reliable colleague, the understanding partner. Each role demands its own energy, its own sacrifice, its own piece of your authentic self. And after years of this performance, something terrible happens. You look in the mirror and no longer recognize the person staring back at you. I remember a woman who came to me, her hands trembling as she spoke about her life. She had built an entire existence around being indispensable to others, and yet she felt more dispensable than ever. Her children took notice her for granted, her husband barely her sacrifice, her friends assumed her availability as their right. She had become like oxygen, essential but invisible, noticed only when absent. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered, and in those words I heard the cry of countless souls who have lost themselves in the labyrinth of endless accommodation. They have become so skilled at reading others' needs that they have forgotten how to recognize their own, so practiced at giving others what they want that they no longer remember what they themselves desire. This is the tragedy of the person who cannot be unavailable. They believe they are serving love, but they are actually serving fear. The fear that without their usefulness they will be abandoned. The fear that without their constant giving they will be forgotten. The fear that if they stop performing their indispensability, they will discover they were never truly needed at all. And so we return to where we began, but now you understand something you did not understand before. Everything gets better when you stop being available, not because the world changes, but because you change. You remember who you are beneath the endless, yes, beneath the compulsive helping, beneath the fear that you are nothing without your usefulness to others. This is not cruelty. This is not abandonment. This is the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for those who truly matter. When you withdraw your constant availability, you offer the world something infinitely more precious than your endless accommodation. You offer your authentic presence, your conscious choice, your genuine self. The path is not easy. There will be guilt, resistance, anger from those who preferred you depleted and available. But on the other side of that discomfort lies something beautiful. You, the real you, the one who has been waiting patiently beneath all the performance, all the giving, all the desperate scrambling to be needed. And when you finally meet this person, when you finally come home to yourself, you will understand what I have learned in all my years of studying the human soul. That the greatest gift you can give the world is not your availability. It is your wholeness, not your endless service, but your authentic being. Not your constant yes, but your conscious, deliberate, sacred no. This is how everything changes. This is how everything gets better. When you finally stop being available to everyone and become truly available to yourself.